Thank you for stopping by at our poster. So coherent mobilization of autonomic and subjective response is central to many emotion theories. And this raises questions about how or what are the exact profiles of those veridical indices that make up an emotion. However, when we look at the research to date, we still struggle to answer fundamental questions. For example, whether there is coherence in autonomic response to emotion or between autonomic and subjective experience, or whether we could use or differentiate the underlying emotional states based on autonomic affective responses. So we addressed this in this study. If you were one of our participants, you would come to the lab and we would hook you up to a number of sensors to measure your bodily responses and eye movements while we exposed you to evocative images like the ones you see on the screen. And you would also be asked to give some subjective ratings about how you felt. And we use this to develop a framework where the pattern of your autonomic and subjective responses to emotion induction can be studied in terms of covariances in a common space. So using this approach, we found an amazingly low-dimensional organization made up of only 2 dimensions that account for how autonomic and subjective responses covary. And those results suggest both coherence and divergence in autonomic affective response to emotion. As an example, if you take a closer look at 2 stimuli, nature and mutilation, you see that while their placement suggests scaling that is consistent with arousal and valence changes, you'll also see 2 dashed lines projecting away from the central patterns. And this suggests that autonomic and subjective responses also diverge and primarily contribute to different dimensions, which is clearer when you look at the overall contribution of autonomic and subjective response, or when you look at the specific autonomic and subjective markers' contributions to this space. Interestingly, those dimensions are quite capable of classification and generalization to unseen stimuli and participants with a surprisingly high degree of accuracy. So what those results suggest is that coherence and divergence in autonomic affective response needs to be conceptualized as part of emotion response. And divergence might be related to specific versus non-specific autonomic constraints. And this study presents a very valuable approach for multimodal and translational research on autonomic affective response. And future studies could address theoretical debates regarding categorical or dimensional organization of emotional response.